Glutes are extremely important while training Brazilian Jiu Jitsu athletes in the weight room. A lot of my experience with the Atos Brazilian Jiu Jitsu team is that when we implement this simple system, they come back to me and they say, "Coach, I'm finishing more submissions, my guard is harder to pass, and my takedowns are much, much more effective."
Before we get started, let's review the roles of the glutes. So the gluteus maximus in particular is responsible for three main joint actions. First is hip extension, second is hip abduction. Now hip abduction can be carried out in the frontal plane and the transverse or horizontal plane. And finally, hip external rotation.
To effectively train these joint actions, we like to target the glutes from a stretched and contracted position, as well as in abduction. Now in Jiu-Jitsu, stretched positions will often be very applicable while trying to finish takedowns or even completing certain positions like arm bars from close guard. Contracted positions will apply directly to the finishing power of a lot of submissions. Oftentimes the hips, being one of the strongest joints, are used as the breaking point for things like arm bars, knee bars, and even less obvious examples like rear naked chokes. Abduction is super, super important when preventing your knees from being pressed together and denying different passes like side smashes.
So going off those three positions, here's a simple way to carry out your lower body workouts. You're just gonna pick one exercise from all three positions. So every time you train lower body, perform one exercise in the stretched position, one exercise in the contracted position, and then one abduction exercise. And make sure with the abduction category that you rotate between frontal plane and transverse plane exercises. So we're gonna show you three exercises from each category. The first is for the stretched position. This is the trap bar deadlift. As you can see, sternum is keeping a neutral spine. And obviously this exercise is the most difficult at the bottom when the glutes are in the stretched position. All right, next up for the stretched position is the dumbbell reverse lunge. Sternum is taking a step back and then returning to the start position. At the bottom, his knee is roughly lined up with the front of the foot. And obviously this exercise is also hardest for the glutes in the stretched position. This here is the high step up. Now, as you can see here, you're getting a lot of range of motion in the ankles, the knees, the hips, similar to a lot of the positions you would find yourself in Brazilian Jiu Jitsu. Turner's making sure to not use too much momentum from the bottom leg, and he also doesn't shoot his hips up. He keeps his torso angle constant as he rises up to the top. All right, now we're gonna show you three exercises from the contracted position. These train the glutes in their shortest position. Here we have the barbell hip thrust. So sternum is keeping his gaze forward, moving mostly from the sternum down. This is the scoop method. Now, if sternum wanted to perform the hinge method, he could look up as he rises upwards. See how his gaze changes from forward to upward? Both are viable methods. Now you can also use bands, you can do pauses, you can do pulses. We have a lot of different methods with the hip thrust. Just like with squats and deadlifts, lots of different variations for you. Okay, now we have the single leg reverse hyper. As you can see, this exercise is hardest at the top, easy at the bottom. It trains the glutes in the contracted position. Now make sure the extension is coming from the hips and that you keep your spine fairly neutral. Now, if you don't have a reverse hyper unit, you can do these with ankle weights, but in that case, I would do them 2 legs at a time. The 45-degree hyper is another contracted position exercise for the glutes, meaning that it's easier at the bottom, hardest at the lockout where the glutes are at their shortened position. Now, sternum is just showing body weight. We do this a lot of different ways. For example, sternum can turn his feet out and round his back and perform them in a more glute dominant fashion. Now, if we wanted to add resistance, most of the time we hold on to a dumbbell. We also have band pegs. You can also use a barbell. And finally, you can do them single leg. Now we're gonna go over 3 exercises from the abduction category. So the first is the lateral band walk. Now this is a frontal plane abduction movement because he's not bent over, he's fairly upright. Always think of pushing through the grounded leg rather than reaching with the up leg. Now we have the extra range sideline hip abduction. So on every rep, sternum is gonna abduct in the frontal plane. Now he's not flexed forward, he's in full hip extension. His foot is turned downwards into slight hip internal rotation, and then he taps the ground, raise up as high as he can go. This hammers the upper glutes. This here is the sideline hip raise. So Sterner's pushing through the grounded leg. He's gonna reach his hips back on the way down, push his hips forward on the way up, and on every repetition, he's getting maximum hip separation, meaning he's raising his leg as high as possible. Now, look at the start here. He's in this flex position. This is different than the other exercise because this is in the transverse plane or the horizontal plane. So we want you to alternate between exercise that have your hips flexed versus exercise that have your hips more extended. So you've got your transverse plane hip abduction movements, you've got your frontal plane hip abduction movements. Make sure you do both of them in your training, alternate between the two.
So the awesome thing about this system is that you're not just going to effectively train your glutes. If you stick to this system, you'll be able to effectively train your quads, your hamstrings, your adductors, and your erector group while also having a well-rounded stimulus for your glutes.
So don't neglect the glutes if you're trying to up your game in Brazilian Jiu Jitsu, or any sport for that matter.